This session is Show Me the Money. Let's set the scene. Farming is principally about decision making. So the digital revolution is helping and will continue to help even more farmers make better decisions.
The data that we've got, no doubt, drives profit. I wouldn't have a gooder handle on what levers we have in this business without the data. And the data allows us to pull those levers when we need to.
By using technology, we can save an awful lot of money in our commodity inputs by putting them in the correct spot.
You know, you look at 25 to 30% reduction in the amount you need to use, whether it be fertiliser, whether it be lime or gypsum. It does change things across the board, you know.
We've got multiple farms with spread over 32 kilometres. I can monitor the moisture in each crop and make irrigation decisions without having to travel out to that farm.
There's three things that guide what we do in terms of changing in a farm business. The first is investment, the second is what is the innovation, and the third is what's your risk profile and what's your appetite for change.
I think with AgTech, we've kind of seen lots of little incremental improvements that have added up to make some benefits. But I think now we're ready for the step change where things really move.
I honestly think the sky's the limit for the technology. It's just a cost. Once you step out and get it, you don't look back.
Digital technology promises to increase efficiencies and productivity. You know, when you look at the value of digital tech in all its forms, and Laura gave us a glimpse earlier, the value to the sector globally is anything between 11 and 20% compound annual growth rate year on year for the next 10 years. It's a massive growth engine backing our agri-food innovation. This session will examine what producers can expect when investing in digital technology on farm, and will explore what Australia's agriculture industry may look like in 10 years' time. I'd like to thank our session sponsor, AgTech Finder, the independent marketplace helping Australian marketers and producers to make confident technology decisions by allowing them to search, sort and compare commercially available solutions. Visit the agtechfinder.com website if you want to find out more. We're proud to be a part of that from day one. I'd like to introduce our first session keynote, who's probably no stranger to many of you. ANZ Bank, of course, have been a strong supportive partner in this summit journey right from the beginning. Jumped in, wanted to support us, and we appreciate that support. So we're super excited to have Michael Whitehead. Sorry, Michael, you can pay me back. Head of Agribusiness Insights at ANZ Bank. Michael's also a farmer in the Western District of Victoria. So, you know, it's not about white collar speaking out, it's about blue collar speaking in, and that's a really important mix. So, welcome, Michael. I guess we won't mention sheep prices, but look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Bruce, for the introduction. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Yes, I do work for a bank, but I am a Western Victorian bull beef and fine wool merino farmer. It is interesting because the common preconception of a banker who says they're involved in farming is somebody who bought about 200 acres about an hour out of Sydney or Melbourne, and they go out there about once a fortnight in the Land Cruiser with the 2 new RMs. And I've got to say, come on, we're all judgmental about people with RMs. If they're too new, then it's clearly a city person wearing them. They annoy their manager and then they go back again and don't dare set foot on the place. That's the other thing. It's interesting. I was sort of thinking about it when you said that I may have damaged the agricultural sector. So I run at ANZ Bank, and I know a lot of you, but I run agricultural research, strategy, modelling, analysis, those kind of things. I may have damaged the agricultural sector a couple of weeks ago in Melbourne. I was driving along, and on 3AW, Neil Mitchell's morning program, for some reason he said, we've had a question, can cattle smell electric fences? Now, I've got sort of some of Australia's best cattle farmers here on my table, Blair and Josie Angus, and there'll be other cattle farmers here, but I did ring in. I thought, what the hell? So I rang in because I'd run a bull beef operation. I said, yes, they can. If the fences go down, then the bulls will take the fence with them and walk through several paddocks to get to the heifers. And then they said on 3AW, so what's the difference between running bulls and running steers? And I sort of had to explain that you run steers for steak, but you grow bulls for hamburgers because you can't taste the testosterone through all the seasoning. And they thought that was disgusting, and I may have really impacted beef sales in Melbourne. So I apologise to any of you beef growers for that. I am going to be I think this talk today, and I'm looking at the timing there, in the time I have, I'll be sort of a lead-in on this panel to to the panel talking later on, to Jacquie talking after me. We discovered we're old UN buddies. And then the panel after that, when we look at everything. Just a part of my background as well, as well as being a Western District farmer, for years I've been raising capital around the world. I was based out of New York for many years, raising money for international agriculture, but particularly for Australian agriculture. And while I don't have a chart on it, the international investors have been, as a lot of us know, growing and growing and growing in Australian agriculture. Not just the Canadian pension funds, not just some of the Chinese buyers, but everyone. There are a lot more of them in the country, investors, at any time than we know about. I get word of it because I've got a lot of contacts in the international capital raising sector. The numbers dipped down during COVID because they couldn't land here to see the asset and sign the cheque, but they are absolutely back, and they are back more than they were before because post-COVID and post-Ukraine uncertainty, Australian agriculture is more in the sights of global investors than ever before. So that's absolutely something to keep in mind, and they are looking not just at agri-production but right down the supply chain and at all the kind of technology that we are talking about and all the great things we're looking at over in the display hall. So that is absolutely part of it. So much of what we're doing with this technology is needing to be aware of what the investors are looking for, what they might be looking for in future, and how to tie into that too. So in the talk today, as I said, that button, where do I point it? The green one, there. I'm going to talk about ag and how the landscape's changing. I'm going to say I slightly cheated on this. And I got some help because I can fix hydraulics on an old John Deere on a 35-degree day. And as Penny and I discussed last night, I can, like Penny, move sheep on a hot day in sheep yards for a few hours until they refuse to move anymore or until the old ewes try and kill you. I can do all that, but I can't do graphics for talks like this. So I tried to do a tech thing, and I went to the Bing version of Creator, and I said to Microsoft Edge Bing Image Creator, can you create an image of how a banker would look for a farmer who is ag tech savvy to create a relationship between them? And this is what it gave me. Ask the people at Microsoft, don't ask me. So it could be pretty close to the truth. When we banks are looking for farmers to work with, that could be how we go about it. So that's what it gave me. So we'll come back to that too. It's not the only thing it did. So one of the things we're looking at today, and we're going to talk about in the panel, is what's going to be needed in farming in 10 years. And just briefly, and I'll go into some more detail as well, for those of us and for everybody here who will be farming in 2033, what are the things that are going to need to change? What are you going to need to plan for? It's going to be that premium product. The competition is going up. Here's another thing too. The amount of subsidies that other countries are putting into their ag is largely going up. Either that or it's going into non-tariff barriers, so ways that people like the Europeans and others could, in a way, keep Australian products out to boost their own agricultural production. It's for food certainty and security. It's for political reasons as well. You don't want unhappy farmers. If anybody here has ever been a geek like me, for example, and broken down maps of US counties by which way they vote, red or blue, they swing far more than we do in Australia. And depending on how nice their government is to them, they can really decide an election in a lot of those states. So we're going to need to increase much better products, increasingly premium products, to compete with the world. New regulations, they are coming in. Where a lot of us will be aware of what New Zealand's doing with greenhouse gas regulations with farmers from 2025. It won't happen here at the same speed, but there will be new regulations. Offtake requirements. Your supermarket will have new demands. Don't hate the supermarkets, don't hate the processors. There's a lot of talk about that in ag, but they will be obliged to have new requirements down the supply chain to meet their requirements. So will your bank. The whole issue of Scope 3. Everybody will need to meet Scope 3, be able to account for what's being supplied with emissions. In terms of weather cycles, they will continue. How do we continue to adapt long-term to those and price volatility? And the decline in manual labour is an interesting one globally. I've lived in the US where, let's be honest, the Mexicans do all the work, not just south, and I don't know if we have anybody who works in American ag here, but whether you are in cotton country in Texas, in fruit country in California, in meat processing way up north in North Dakota, Americans aren't doing that labour, it's Mexican. In Europe, that's coming in from Eastern Europe, that labour. It is getting harder and harder to get people to do that manual labour, and we need to prepare for that. In talking about some of the things to adapt for, it's interesting now. What we've done here is we've taken the last few El Niños over the last 30 years or so, with the suggestions that we're in another one right now. And the blue line at the top is wheat production. It looks at wheat, it looks at barley, and it looks at canola, and just how much wheat dips in every El Niño. How do we as farmers prepare for a coming drought that may happen, future droughts as well, and be in a better position with tech to ride those out and survive through them? In terms of changes in Australian farming landscape, what we've done here, and these are ABARES figures, is the share of farms which are now big rather than smaller farms. And this is over about the last 30 years. ABARES figures would say that 30 years ago, about 10%, this is their classifications of wheat properties, livestock properties, were sort of larger ones. Now with wheat ones, it's approaching 3/4 of them. We are seeing that consolidation, that growing size. It's one to talk about for this industry as well, with the tech industry, because those growing operations are going to have the sophistication, the staff, the resources, the initiative to be looking at more and more technological innovations and options as well. And they are really going to be the focus. A lot of them will be corporate owned, or a lot of them will have big family boards. And they, to a degree, are going to be the drivers of driving so much adoption, similarly with the livestock ones as they grow. I was dying for an excuse to disagree with Laura on something, and so here we have it. I didn't know you'd be putting up a slide on the average age of farmers. It's interesting if you take the ABARES figures on the average age of farmers in Australia compared to what you said about Canada. And according to ABARES, 30 years ago, it was 53 in Australia. Now, for any of you oldies like me, might remember that period back then when ag was more in the doldrums, and the city media used to say, well, farming's all over. These farmers, they're so old. They're 53. I mean, that's it for the industry. Now, if you take the current ABARES figures, the average age of a farmer in Broadacre is about 64 in Australia. And what does that tell you? It tells you with the shrinking number of farms, farmers who are still in it, I'm going to take it as a positive, are healthy, are seeing a long-term future in the industry. They've bought the neighbour next door to them. The neighbour next door sold out and bought a house at Merimbula or Coffs Harbour or Barwon Heads or somewhere. They're growing in operations. This is also, to be official, the age of the primary decision maker in the farm business. So you could think of it as the family farm where everybody sits around the table, talks about what should happen going forward, and then the 64-year-old says, right, we're going to do as I say. So that tells you a couple of things about tech as well. One is that is something to tap into as to where the decisions are being made, and two, that will not keep growing up forever. Probably not going to stand here in 20 years and say the average Australian farmer is 84 and loving it more than ever. We will see that generational change. We will see that passing on. It's just to a degree being postponed by some of the positives over the last few years. The 2015 and around that period, exports to China boom in prices. We got through the drought, and then the recent few years boom in prices. One of the other big things we're seeing at ANZ, and it drives through our figures, and we put out a report last year called Greener Pastures 2, looking at farming over the next 10 years. We are seeing the return of the two-generation farm. The family farm is absolutely back. Now, about 15 years ago, you're on your farm, your kids had gone off to uni, so you had one kid doing commerce, one kid doing physio, and I don't know, the other one didn't find a job and you wished they'd do something, but none of them were going to come back to the farm. Now it's changing. We are seeing the return of the two generation, or three in some cases, as the farms get bigger, as there is so much more to do in agriculture. It's not just driving and fixing tractors as so much of us grew up with. The technological options, the financing options, the scientific options, the commodity prices make it more attractive, and that will absolutely drive innovation as that grows. What we saw here was our predictions based on some calculation. Going forward, in about 10 years, 40% of Australian farms be in the same ownership but may have two generations. Actually, one of the other big drivers we saw on this, and some of you may identify, was your child's partner or spouse. 10 or 15 years ago, I'm not going back there. You can't get a decent coffee in Wagga or Hamilton or Mount Gambier or wherever. Now they can, and now they can get a job at the hospital, or the kids can get a decent education. So socially, as regional centres grow, and as great universities are out here, people are coming back and growing in these areas. We're seeing that likely that 30% will be bought by the neighbour, and that's part of that consolidation. If we were here talking the rise in agricultural land prices, which is pretty common around Australia, if you break down all the reasons for that rise, the biggest one is an economic concept called buying the neighbours. And we're seeing that likely to grow. 15% stay in the same family but go down and retire, and only 15% of individual farms purchased by someone outside. Our forecast, so we'll see how they go. Just the last figure, this is a really good stat collected by ABARES, and it is the average age difference between farmers and their spouses according to industry. We've wondered for ages why they collected it and what it means, but this conference, and as we can see from here, if you can read it from the back, the shortest age difference between farmer and their spouse is in the wheat industry and in cropping, and the biggest one, Blair and Josie, don't know if it applies to you, is in the beef industry. Now, tried to work out for ages what this could mean. Clearly, it applies to the tech sector and the fact that these partnerships will be able to work together, so it gives people time to innovate and explore new ideas. Well, that's sort of one thought. One other thing that we've done, and if you go to the ANZ stand out there amongst all the other great tech things, we surveyed a whole lot of our farm clients about ag tech. And what were some of the things, here's a paper we've just put out, some of the things that were a minor barrier to entry, a medium barrier and a high barrier to entry. And it is just interesting, and this is our survey, so things will differ. The things that were raised as the biggest barrier to entry by our farming clients were that internet access and connectivity. And secondly, how to align the product with the business challenge. Is it a solution to a problem, or is it a solution looking for a problem? That also creates the whole discussion about how to market these things as well. So I won't sort of dwell on this because these are pretty obvious to so many people in the industry, and we're part of the discussion. Profitability. How will these things lead to profitability? And it was on that great film that you put together just before as well. Whether it's more yields, whether it's reducing your costs, your labour needs, your risk, most importantly, freeing up your time to explore new things to do with your operation, new ideas, rather than being bogged down in the day-to-day operations. On the issue of costs, What we've looked at here is they're going to become more and more important as incomes go down. We've heard about the fact that ag's been aiming for 100 billion in the gross value of production. Well, it ain't looking like it's heading there at the moment and may not be for a while. The gross value of production headed up and up and up based on grain prices post-Ukraine, based on cattle and to a degree sheep prices in the post-drought rebuilt. And then as that further has come out, it's gone down while costs have plateaued. The interesting one at the bottom is real net farm cash incomes, because you can see in real terms over about the last 30 years, if we ignore that spike, and we're not going to get a post-Ukraine wheat spike every day, and we're not going to get a post-drought restocking rebuild every day, then those incomes have not only stayed the same, but are starting to dip now. If some of those circumstances don't come back that we had in the past few years, it may stay like that. So the whole issue of if your overall income is down, if your costs are going up, you need to adapt and you need to look for ways to increase on your costs. This is a very crowded chart, but the thicker line once again shows that if you take every cost versus farm income since 2000, all the costs have gone up at a big rate, whether it's fuels, fuels and electricity are the ones that have grown the fastest, but income growth is now lower than all of those. So it's always been a tough business. We've always looked for efficiency. We've always told ourselves the good times won't last forever and we have to prepare for them. And we've always known that the good farmers are the ones who will adapt to prepare for those times going forward. So the other thing in terms of sustainability, and this whole session is about investment and about bankers as well, both bankers and particularly the investors, whether it's the Canadian ones, whether it's the Dallas Violin Teachers Pension Fund who have $30 million to put into Australian ag, and having travelled the world for many years, yes, the Dallas Violin Teachers Pension Fund is the kind of one which will have $30 million to put into ag. They will have sustainability requirements, they will be looking for new options, and these are the kind of things that will come out of tech to boost that investment. Whether it's, as we say, reduced inputs, whether it's your crop and soil management, and particularly your emissions, because there will be so many new regulatory requirements for that. Now, I said that Microsoft Edge came up with that picture of a banker looking for a farmer. I then asked it how to articulate how, if the banker put out something written looking for a farmer, it would do it. And yes, once again, this is the work of Microsoft Edge. If I was ever looking for a relationship, I think I could now put that one up on Tinder or something. But according to Microsoft, yes, bankers looking for ag tech farmers, a day at your farm, our ideal date, where you reveal how ag tech has transformed your operations, boosting both profitability and sustainability. And then a quiet evening watching the stars with our shared vision of where tradition and technology coexist seamlessly. If anybody wants to rush and buy that off me to use as their marketing, go for it. So those are things, and just in the last couple of slides, what are banks and investors looking for going forward? It is about money. Show me the money. It is about profitability. We, as the banker, ANZ or the others, want you to be profitable. We want to work with you. It's good for the industry. It's good for the bank as well. The investors very much so are out there. They are looking for the long-term returns, very much on risk. And here's a big thing, and some of us talked about this last night. Except that over those 10, ACCEPT, over those 10 years, we, the banks, will get our technology act together. We will look at every option, but we will be looking to integrate our technology with farm technology as much as possible to do everything, to reducing the risk, which makes that whole process more attractive, to basically looking to see who will be the better operators. The sustainability regulations, absolutely data-driven. It helps with that to promote to a lot of our stakeholders, and traceability, very much making your operation viable and having access to those premium markets. And then to finish off, before we go to Jacqueline and to the panel, I did finally ask Microsoft Edge, how would things be when the banker finally meets the farmer who's ag tech savvy and the relationship works out well? And it gave me that. Don't know why, but that was the final result. Yes, that won't be used in ANZ marketing. So there is a number of things, the way that we are seeing things change, what we are seeing bankers and investors look for, how things will look in 20 years and what happens going forward. Thank you very much for your time, and I think I'll hand to Jacqueline. Cheers.
Thanks again, very insightful. Now it's time for our case study, which will be delivered by Professor Jacquie McGlade, Chief Scientist and Co-Founder of natural capital measurement provider Downforce Technologies. It's a pleasure to have you here, Jacquie. In fact, the Global Digital Farm has recently announced a partnership with Downforce Technologies to assess soil organic carbon levels at one of our high-tech research sites, with the first results to be released at the field tour this afternoon and tomorrow. So I really look forward to that. Welcome, Jacquie. It's a privilege to have you here.
Great. Good morning. So I am, yes, standing here as the Chief Scientist, Co-Founder of Downforce Technologies. But just a little bit of my background. I actually live in Kenya. I live in the Rift Valley. And the reason why I'm going to say this is because it's relevant that I'm married to the chief of the Maasai tribe, which means I have oversight of millions of hectares, but also thousands of cattle. That all looks wonderful. And for millennia, you could say that the Rift Valley has never really needed to separate profitability and prosperity. They just lived together. People were living in the Rift Valley, their animals were with them, pastoralists and so on. But unfortunately, we have had droughts, and we have had thousands and millions of livestock die. This was taken just earlier in the year. You would think that in this day and age we could deliver water at the extent that we need it, but it's just impossible. So whether we like it or not, agriculture has to change. It has to shift. Kenya's sort of agricultural sector generates $31 billion per year. Only 3 is for export. So pretty much all of that agricultural production is used by the local population. Well, that's the sort of story. However, it's all about not being able to get to that export grade, except in flowers and in coffee. And there, of course, we have massive markets. So the whole livestock industry, the whole grain industry is operating at a very, what I would say, very low level. And here we are actually on the precipice in terms of climate change to change the whole story. And so what I want to really think about is how we can move from just profitability to prosperity and profitability, because at the end of the day, whether you're like me, living with warriors and people who are actually out in the bush, conservationists who want to share that landscape and make a lot of tourist dollars out of the same land, it's important that we get the perspective right of how we bring those two together. Now, some of you will know that a few weeks ago we had a summit in Nairobi, the Africa Climate Summit. And there were a lot of Australian delegates there, from government, but also from the farming sector. Because when we were talking about pathways to the future, it's very clear that Africa represents 2 parts. And this is really, for me, a huge opportunity for agriculture. Yes, we can store carbon in the kind of big geotech side. And the Rift Valley is probably the best place in the world. It's got geothermal, I mean, literally to die for, and it's got enormous capacity to draw carbon dioxide down. But what the leaders who came, the governments and the presidents who came, were saying is that agriculture represents the best opportunity to change the entire development paradigm that we have, because effectively the best farming, the most resilient farming, is not only going to deliver profitability, but is going to deliver a different kind of prosperity for the world. Now, I've put this up because in the backdrop to any of those kinds of discussions, we're going to need technologies that take us on a different kind of journey. So there's been a huge amount of effort put into decarbonizing, and I'm sure many of you do your emissions reduction calculations, and you think about how you're going to reduce your fuel costs. I think what we've just seen from Michael is evident. If you don't keep control over the things going up, you're never going to make a living, that's for sure. So it's in everyone's interest to try to reduce fuel consumption and so forth, which inevitably will help you on that decarbonization journey. So here we are in 2023, everyone's sort of trying to do their best. But then many of you, and here of course, CN 2030 talks about net zero. How are we going to get to net zero? So just to be very clear, What is net zero? Net zero is this phrase that's used around not only decarbonizing your operations, but also trying to get to the unabatable emissions by doing something. In other words, putting removals right in the forefront, the sequestration. Can I store more carbon by just thinking, by adjusting in small ways what I'm doing, or maybe even changing fundamentally the way I just run my business? Now that's very good, that's excellent, but that's not going to get us out of the deep trouble where we are. So what we actually see now emerging are high ambition corporates, but also governments thinking in that way, but certainly companies, where the high ambition is not just we're going to fix today's problem, but we're also going to fix the historical problem. We're going to go back in time and think about how much we have emitted, how much we removed, and that difference we're now going to take into our forward calculations and try to essentially level out our historical emissions as well. Now, is it worth doing that? Well, it turns out that for agriculture, it's that extra effort that will get you to your premium product. That's the difference between producing a product that will just compete in the world and the premium product, which you can actually say, oh, and I'm also taking care of my historical emissions. And that's a massive step change that we're going to see. So farmers are beginning to talk about that. So we've had a whole variety of targets and standards for which you need data, no doubt about it. But rarely has it come down to you, to the local level on your farm. You know, how do I talk about the Sustainable Development Goals? It's all up here in the sort of international discussions. But the reality of it is that governments and countries and business and the whole economy really needs to hit the Sustainable Development Goals, because it is the way that we're going to get to a more resilient future, and it's going to keep us alive on planet Earth. So yes, we've got lots of targets talking about soil health, about biodiversity, carbon, and so forth. And what has emerged are a whole raft of things that you could sign up for. So the science-based targets, the TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures, Climate Financial Disclosures. We've got the whole of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Now, those are fine. They're targets. They're ways in which you can operate your business. And I'm pretty sure some of you will already have brushed up against them. TNFD is sort of about to come. And they are real, and they're not going to go away. But at the end of the day, we need certification. We need products for which there is no greenwashing, for which you literally can say, I have gone through a proper auditing, verification process, and I can sort of stand scrutiny internationally. This is where my product is. So the banks are doing their bit, and we have other bodies like ISO doing theirs. So Downforce, we're very pleased to say, we have just arrived at the point where we've got ISO certification, and that has meaning for an industry which is going to have to compete broadly across the world against other types of food, because there's other kinds of food being produced which don't necessarily come from out in the fields. So here's another kind of look to the future. So standards are important. Certification is incredibly important, as I'm sure many of you know, for export purposes. And then when we want to think about this high ambition through supply chains, we need to bring a lot more people into the conversation from the beginning. We always hear, or I often hear about, oh, the consumers are very slow to pick up, you know, we're all at the whim of the consumer, they don't buy, etc. They don't pay the extra, they can't afford, we've got a cost of living crisis, and so forth. But ultimately, we need agriculture that delivers across the board high nutrient status, high quality food for everybody, that is affordable, but effectively makes sure that there's prosperity to the people who are actually producing the food. So this is where the trick of carbon farming has to come in, because you are providing this additional service. You're not just providing food, you're actually taking care of land that is going to do huge good for the climate change and for the whole way in which we operate the planet. So when we're talking about getting through to a net positive supply chain, and here we are in the supermarket, every single step of that requires data to be connected and to almost have a sort of life cycle process going along with it. No doubt about that. Now, you can't do that on your own. So what we need to sort of get to the heart of this idea about using frontier technologies is, yes, of course, you might instrument your fields. You might be doing smart agriculture. But what about your neighbor? What about the region? How do you connect up? How can you make sure that your on-farm strategy connects to the cluster that you're sitting in, all of the farmer clusters? So thinking about green strategies and land management schemes means being able to have interoperability, to think more generally, yes, I want to be profitable, but it's very good if everybody is in the same boat, lifted at the same time, rather than you're kind of in the old model of competition, you're doing better than your neighbors. No, it's better if everybody gets into the same level of high quality products. Now, another thing that's coming down the road, which some of you will have heard about, is natural capital. And if you look at many of the curves that talk about how we are going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, you see that the top levels start to tail out. And then there's this huge big green piece underneath. So we're bringing greenhouse gas emissions down through the century. But the final solution lies with nature. And the great thing about nature is it will do the heavy lifting for you if you actually set it up correctly. And as farmers and as people who work on the land, that should be something that's fundamental to the way that we think every day. So there is a sort of framework that is out there. It is part of our national accounting structures, natural capital. Natural capital has now become an asset class. This is very important in financial worlds, for bankers, for the New York Stock Exchange, and so on. Why? Well, because it puts value, and that can be an economic value, it can be a social value, intrinsic value, on natural capital. That includes biodiversity, but water, land, soil, carbon, and so forth. So this accounting is really where the biggest challenge lies. We can produce a lot of data about the biophysics of what you have, but who's going to put the value on that? Who's going to put the value on the water on your property? And that's why valuing natural capital assets is the next frontier that we have to address, because we cannot afford to leave any of these assets out of the calculation. So producing food at cost to other natural capitals is not going to be a resilient solution. It's not going to get you to that net positive outcome. So in the frontier technologies, we still need to think a lot. Yes, you can have a lot of information coming in from avatars. I can go and inquire on great big AI systems, and we can have a lot of open data. But in the end, it's that intelligent interrogation that we still need. So one of the things that we do in Downforce, and it's becoming sort of almost the norm, but not quite, we're still at the cutting edge of that, is to take what we would call big data and small data, that hyperlocal thing that's happening on your farm, but put it into the context of what works where in other places. And the intelligence then comes from, in a sense, harvesting all of the knowledge that we would have in a room like this and being able to translate that back to what's happening on your property. And that is, behind the scenes, requires many, many things: artificial intelligence, lots of ontologies, metaphysics, and so forth. But here we come to the rub. And genuinely, and I say this because I live in a developing country, I live in Africa, and I'm surrounded by many others who come from similar settings. All of the AI that we have today, and I do mean all, has come from a particular way of constructing the world. And I can tell you now, it does not come from a small farmer sitting in a little farm somewhere. It does not come from someone who is running a big farm like here. Now, you might think that's a trivial point, but the way that we construct our data, the way that we put and join the dots, is actually being controlled by somebody who's probably sitting in Silicon Valley. And that's not a trivial thing, because what you really need is an AI system that has been built and driven by farmers for farmers. So we shouldn't, a little bit like Michael says, you saw what happened if you arbitrarily put things together, you get weird things come out. So what we actually have to take very seriously is the intelligence that you have literally in the room, the natural intelligence, and make best use of that to become the farming, the agri-food artificial intelligence of the future. So it should be informed by those who are the practitioners, by those who have the experience, rather than by looking for algorithms of just some arbitrary data put together. So this is a plea, really, that as part of all of our work, we think that we spend time thinking about what is that piece of intelligence that we could put in to a common repository to build a knowledge of how the sector can move forward. In the same way that nature does it. Nature uses genomics inside and out. It uses intelligence to kind of create the new solutions, to create the adaptation. And what we're trying to do really is to take the omics, and now it's both the intelligence side and also the entire genomics to our core and being able to use that. I mean, just to give you an idea, in genomics today, there are probably 4,000 people who do nothing but ontology. They try to find the links between different parts of the genome to see what will work where. Imagine if we had that kind of capacity of knowledge around, your farm, David. What works on your farm? Could I get that sort of genomic, that imprint from your farm, and put it into the database so that others could try to emulate and do that? So that's sort of what we need in the future. We need explicit individuals who can take that knowledge forward. So we do need a new future for agriculture. There's room for everybody, but if you think about the industrial agriculture and some of the long-term implications for what it's doing to soil, if we look at the plantation ecologies and what that does for all of the things that we need, the services, the pollination and so forth, and what regenerative farming can do, it's not that one is better or worse, it's that we need to really consider the long-term implications of all of them. Now, many of you, I know, have got really caught up in the world of soil carbon and how we measure things, and there's infinite numbers of technologies. And what Downforce, because we're neutral about all of these, we just want the best data to tell us what's happening, is to really understand, again, what data is fit for purpose. Do you really need to know to 3 decimal places your soil carbon? Probably not. You probably need to know to 1 decimal place, but maybe in Australia that's relevant. But I can tell you, if you're in the UK, 1%, like 1 is good enough to know because there's such a vast range. So, using these technologies, you need a guidance to tell you why these things are relevant. You need to bring together, just as we've done in Downforce, the capacity to build that digital twin. In other words, an easy-to-use picture of your farm. And this is an example, very quickly, it's the last one I'll do for the case study, is to say, when you bring all of that together, you get insights that you could never get just by walking your farm, just by flying your farm, because there are data, there is intelligence, there is knowledge that will tell you literally how your land is responding at a very fine scale, but you need to make bigger decisions for profitability. So to reduce the costs, to reduce the impacts of those fuel costs rising, of input costs rising, you need to have as much granularity as you can, but to be able to aggregate that up to your natural capital asset. So here, for example, we were able with one customer to be looking at their cropping patterns and to look year by year at a very high level of precision as to what was the effect of a different cropping rotation in every field. And believe you me, it turns out that there are some particular combinations in particular fields that will leave a legacy of carbon after 6 years, and there are some combinations that will strip the carbon right out. And if we see that soil carbon is an indicator of soil health, you'd want to know that because it will actually help you reduce the amount of inputs at the end of the day. So this is the quality of the data that can now be generated. The question is, do we have the artificial and the real intelligence to be able to put it to work? So it's not going to be an easy journey integrating this into the bottom line, but it's clearly where the world is going, to be able to create a premium product, to meet all those standards and the requirements and the certification. This is the kind of data that we need to ingest and take into our daily business. So I'll leave with this. We have to rethink the way we operate on planet Earth, whether it's in the way we grow rice, all of these different elements. But they're all interconnected. Literally, they're interconnected. And for me, the future of all these new technologies is that they don't lose sight of the fact that planet Earth and your local environment is connected to the next bit of the environment. Nothing is separate. And so that's why we need artificial intelligence. That's why we need these kinds of data systems to talk to each other so that you can literally begin to learn from what's happening in the bigger environment, to scale up, but also to be able to look at that small piece of your paddock that's been worrying you for the last sort of few years, why it's not responding. So it's that flexibility that I hope that certainly Downforce and others will be able to provide for farming going into the future. Thank you.
Now moving on to our panel discussion, I'd like to welcome back to the stage, if I may, Laura Kilcrease, Michael Whitehead, of course, who will join Dr. Penny Schulz, who's a livestock technical specialist at the South Australia Drought Hub, and Stu Adam, a good friend of innovation ecosystem in Australia, the CEO of Agronomeye. And of course, Professor Michael Friend, Pro-Vice Chancellor of Research and Innovation for Charles Sturt University, who will moderate the panel discussion.
Thanks, Dave. Well, look, what an amazing opportunity with this panel to ask your questions. I think this morning has set the context for some really rich discussion in this session. Just to reiterate what Dave said, if you like someone else's question, please hit like because it elevates it to the top of the Slido list. So there'll be the questions that we'll be asking first. But to start, we've asked each of our presenters to make a statement of intent to really, over a couple of minutes, just to set the context. Again, please ask questions using Slido during this period because that will set up the discussion afterwards. So without, excuse me, further ado, I'll hand over to you, Laura.
So you've heard a lot from me already. So my intent is very simple. Old friends and new partners. Think about it. Old friends, new partners. Michael?
Wow, wonderfully brief. Once again, you've heard an awful lot from me as well. So a brief statement of intent is, along with the slogan of this, as far as the show me the money, where is the attraction going to be, where is the interaction going to be between the money, the banks, the lenders, the investors, what are they going to look for, what are the benefits going to be, what's going to be necessary to make things keep operating at their optimum in 10 years from now.
Thank you, Michael.
Today I've brought with me a bit of a wish list for livestock producers. There's 4 things on that wish list, which I might get a chance to sort of elaborate on a bit later, but one's environmental asset management, just like we would for looking at a return on assets managed or something. Another one's more autofillimation. I've just made that up. So rather than automation, it's about more autofill and using technology to help us get the data without actually inputting it. A transparent and fully online livestock marketplace. And the last one's a more connected value chain. And I've seen glimpses of that already today in my wish list, so I'm a little bit excited.
Yeah, thank you. The intent from me is to basically advocate for a bottom-up approach to transforming the process in terms of sustainability, in terms of profitability. Currently, I think we see a lot of top-down with farmers unaware of what they're being spoken to about, and enabling farmers to have agency in the process, design a future that is both profitable and sustainable through their own lens. And it's not about winning lotto or the equivalent of winning lotto and wake up one day and this is all done. This is about thousands and thousands of projects on farms across the country, across the world, and enabling that process so the likes of Michael can more effectively fund those projects to enable farmers to take that step forward in their journey.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we've got some questions coming through, some great questions. First question for you, Michael. What do you think is the biggest mega trend coming for agriculture? And as a nation, are we ready?
The biggest mega trend?
Mega trend.
Right, the biggest mega trend coming for agriculture. Wow, love these questions without notice. I used to be a media advisor to politicians. He used to teach them, if you don't like the question, give any answer and ignore the question, but I won't do that. The biggest mega trends for agriculture post-COVID and post-Ukraine are back to food certainty and food security. Sounds like a cliche, but it's absolutely true. The fact that countries are importing more, storing more, but they want to make sure that it's coming. Why is that important to Australian farmers, and why is that important to us? Because it's not just slapping ourselves on the back. We are the most efficient big producers of agriculture in the world. If I put up something out of my slide library comparing subsidies of everybody else to us, we come next to nothing. And that next to nothing is made up of drought subsidies and a diesel fuel rebate. So we get nothing. So the mega trend is to be able to make sure you are getting reliable product, low political risk product, good product, and product that you'll still be getting in 10 years. That's what our export markets want, and that's what we have to keep adapting to be able to provide. And if, as our farmers continue to get bigger, as they get more efficient, we can keep doing that, then we set ourselves up to not only continue to be that global export powerhouse, but become even more important.
Great answer. Thanks, Michael. I think it's really important to acknowledge that we have highly innovative farmers and adaptable farmers. This is a great question, and I think I'm going to address it to you, Stu. It's really about how we use data. And the question is, how do we incentivise producers to share data to inform AI that is fit for purpose for a farm?
Sure. I think I've got a video that I'll queue up. I won't hit play on just yet. But again, it comes back to what I kind of said at the start, and enabling farmers to have clarity and confidence in their decisions, and then having the integrity and transparency when it comes to how those projects relate to the sustainability or the profitability of their farm. So I think that the ability for farmers, and probably worth bringing up a video now, which just shows an example of, here we've got a farm in Queensland. They've been able to use our product and our tool, which is a digital twin, to assess the likelihood of erosion across a certain part of their asset. That's come from really high detailed imaging and analysis. We can show you where the extent of the wetland would be, so the actual impact. There is a baseline of vegetation that underpins that, so you can understand what that improvement over time would be, integrate satellite imagery, and then be going back to the root of that problem and identify, how much earthworks would be required to tackle that issue. So there's one example. That same data set is then used again, and I'll come to a point, in a high integrity above ground carbon project. Again, that vegetation has been captured once, used many times, and enabling the farmer to get engaged in a particular program or opportunity that they would have otherwise been unable to do. And then the last part is a property which they also own nearby, which is captured in the same instance, and this is enabling them to go to a more profitable farming approach, which is bankless irrigation for a cotton development. So in that instance, the farmer has worked with the bank, the earthworks contractor, they've gotten grants, all from a single data set that has then enabled them to go on a journey that they feel comfortable with. Was the end of the question around AI? Was that
just really to share data to inform AI.
Yeah, and then the AI piece comes in after that, once we have an understanding of the farmer's intent around what part of the where are they weighting their intent when it comes to a particular project? Are they doing an earthworks development or managing erosion purely for the landscape development, or are they trying to get the production outcome around growing more grass as well? And the value that the farmer puts on any given part of that outcome will then inform the AI to give them scenarios to then lean into and then engage with the various people that would be required, and then push all of that information into the supply chain in a way that is recognised as both good business for them today in terms of driving profitability, but ultimately the sustainability that's recognised as a credential on the other side of that transaction, and the various people that would be engaged in that transaction. Clarity, confidence, integrity and transparency, I think, is where it kind of really comes down to.
Great, thank you. The next question is to address to anyone on the panel, but I'm going to give you, Penny, and then Michael, the right of response to this. Or do you see ag tech contributing to improved margins as opposed to being price takers and using the tech simply to stay in business?
I hope so. I really do. And for those that are in the red meat industry right now, we're all hurting a little bit with prices. And I do hope that a more connected value chain will alleviate some of those extreme ups and downs when we have more information going back and forth and more understanding of what each part of that chain needs, so that we don't get into a position where a price crashes and we're all hurting and everyone's upset. So I do think that data sharing in particular will help our prices and our markets. It's not going to guarantee us good prices all the time, like that's la la land, but I think it will help us have less surprises, and I think it will help us have less extremes in that space.
Great, thank you.
The price takers one, we hear that word a lot, but it's the nature of the business. And we know that when we go into it. And we don't sort of complain when wheat goes to record highs that we're still being price takers and being forced to take these record high prices. Nor, I suppose, to some people, I know cattle price is very low at the moment. Sheep price is particularly low. Tell us about it, we sheep people. But it's great for people buying as well. So price takers is always a double-edged sword. But as far as that margin side of things, on two sides, that continues to be very exciting. I had a 6-hour drive up here, so I got to listen to so many American ag tech podcasts on the way up, and listening to particularly some cattle genetics tied in with digital technology and what this meant for future margins and operations as well. Just so many possibilities there on the livestock side alone to increase your margins. And secondly, if you're not being a price taker, if your product is not just your wheat going off or not just your fat lambs going off, but to have something that you can market as a premium, and talk to some of the big grain operators who are now marketing zero carbon grain at a premium, or what that's doing for your canola as well, that will give you the opportunity. So yeah, a lot of people will continue to be price takers, and it works both ways. It goes up and it goes down, but what it can do for margins is just terrific.
Great. Next question I'm going to direct to you, Laura, and that is, what is Canada's position on the EU's regulations around farm inputs and quality assurance demands to gain market access?
Well, you know, I think one of the things that's stated by our Prime Minister on anything to do with any kind of business in Canada at the moment is climate and climate change. And we've committed to the 2050 Paris Accord, and we're putting billions of dollars into anything to do with climate. Now, from my perspective in Alberta, we are the largest producer of oil and gas in the country, and clearly that's the #1 target. But it's actually amazingly clean compared with what's expected. The second market to that clean issue and the European standards is actually agriculture. Frankly, we have enough cows burping enough methane to set a few things on fire, but we have commitments, if we're going to sell our products into other areas, to meet their standards. So I think the short answer is, yes, we're committed to meet the standards, but we don't want to just meet someone else's standards. We'll set the standards ourselves on what we need to do and how we're going to get there. We have to do it in a way that's, though, profitable for the farmers and the participants along that value chain. So the short answer is, yes, we're committed. The longer answer is how we're going to get there. And I think some of those issues are going to come from technologies that are not in the farming sector today. They're going to come from technologies that have been developed for the oil and gas business or other industries that will actually transfer across.
Great, thank you. The next question follows on really nicely, and it's contexted within Australia, but Laura, you may wish to comment on this as well, because it's to all of the panel. What kits in your tool bag would make sustainable development goals tangible and practical for Australian farmers? So it's what kits in the tool bag would make sustainable development goals tangible and practical for Australian farmers. I mean, I guess we're looking forward to 10 years in the future, aren't we? So we're seeing which tools might be in development, perhaps. Anyone want to tackle that?
I'm going to jump in because you've got 4 confused faces here, so I'm going to take one for the team.
No, you've got 5.
Right, yes. Great question. Again, whoever came up with that one, terrific question. Let's start by being a little bit controversial, because a good panel should be controversial and memorable. If and when we arrive at some kind of national regulatory system or benchmark, finally, that allows the industry to have more of an idea of where it is heading. We know we're heading in a general direction. We know what a number of the regulations may be, whether they are trade regulations through to the EU, whether they are going along the lines of what some requirements will be from Scope 3 and others. But that's not in our tool bag, but that's something that the system needs to have, that the landscape needs to have. What we will do as the giant Death Star bank, which is looking to have integrated systems to be able to, in terms of fitting all those regulations or meeting all the regulations that will be there in 2033, rewarding and benefiting and working with the agricultural producers who are achieving as much as they can down those sustainability lines, the technology where it is seamless. So whether it is on that measurement, whether it is on looking at where your crop is going, where your livestock are going as well, enhancing and making sure the technology all works together. So we will have our systems, but the fintech will need to work better with the ag tech.
Great. Death Star Bank probably won't be seeing that in ANZ marketing either, I'm guessing. Who wants to pick up on it next?
Yeah, I think I'll pick up on where the case study kind of left off, which was how do we measure natural capital? And there is work and technology being developed in that space, which is good. It's something that farmers are very aware of. And I mentioned before about environmental asset management, and we do need more tools in our toolkit to be able to do that. But farmers are very aware. And I think at the moment we talk so much about carbon, soil carbon, storing it in trees, and reducing emissions. But if we talk about environmental stewardship and being sustainable, that is so much more than just carbon. So that is about biodiversity, that it's about water, and Australia is technically the extinction capital for most species. I'm not sure if everybody's aware of that, but that's what we're dubbed. Our rate of extinction for species in our country is the highest, one of the highest in the world. And our water management, I mean, we talk about our Murray-Darling Basin Plan, we've got other state-based plans as well. We're not so great at that at the moment either. So sustainability is so much more than carbon. So we need lots of things to be happening outside of that carbon emission space as well, which is actually taking up a lot of research and development money to be able to claim that we are sustainable, because that's what we have to do.
Laura.
You know, I'd like to come back and just mention one thing on the last question and bring it forward here. The EU sustainability goals have been around 20-odd years, actually 30-odd years. Actually, it might even be close to 40 now, and I'm not really that old. But while they've been there, there's no one been really actioning them to the point until recently. That really, and I think one of the reasons is we've actually never tied the value of the sustainability goals to the value of the profitability that can come from implementing them, not for good. I then compare that to the issues in the stock market. So I'm going to go to the financial side. You know, if I look back in the same period, roughly 30 years, and I look at the top 100 companies on the New York Exchange or any major exchange, I could see what they were worth by what was on their balance sheet, their assets, their land, their buildings, their equipment, their work in progress. Fast forward, I can go to the balance sheet of the top 100 companies in the world today, or in any of those exchanges. I can't read on their balance sheet what equates to their worth in the market, because it's called intellectual property, it's called their compliance with ESG, right, or other sustainability factors. But it's not there written for me anymore, and yet those companies are worth trillions and trillions of dollars, right? It's their intellectual property they're using. So as I think going forward into what you're saying, I think it's sustainability with profitability, and then finding a way to measure those intangibles that we can't put in a normal balance sheet anymore.
Stu.
Yeah, I mean, if you're farmers today, they're not, they're finding it challenging to go and dive headfirst into a program or align themselves with the framework, when what they can be doing is actually taking the steps to understand their own backyard very, very clearly, get their own house in order, and then choose the pathway for that information to be laid up into a particular framework, whether today that's framework A and that one data set feeds that, and then all of a sudden, tomorrow it's another framework or another compliance or regulatory piece that they have to engage with. Having their own data, their own understanding of the natural environment, the relationship between productivity and sustainability, and how they're communicating that in very clear ways, I don't think ultimately changes their decisions today. But if they were trying to run around and make big bets on what framework they're going to align to for 10 years' time, that can be very confusing, and they don't understand the value. So where do you start to look in terms of pure production benefit and the genuine feel that they have around sustainability and their the ongoing concern of running the farm into a changing climate, but ultimately doing that in a very structured, direct way that then enables them to go on that journey once those things become more mature and less hazy generally for them. There's steps that you can take now, and good quality information will also always be valuable and be able to articulate a story that people are going to continue to value, as well as sustainable lending, which we've seen kind of back off after a bit of a peak, and even the banks, talking about being controversial, not going to bag the banks, but
not ANZ.
Not ANZ. There's green loans, for example, that are out there, and there's products, and the expectation from the banks that these products were going to fly off the shelf. And from my understanding, they've really struggled to get traction because maybe the discount's not great enough, so the incentive's not there, and it's very unclear as to, for the farmer, what they're getting into. But not only that, the bank doesn't really truly appreciate how they're expecting farmers to come and articulate why this project would be green and be worth funding, right? So if that data doesn't exist and the transaction can't be, clean and easy and regularly powered by the same technologies or similar technologies to give confidence to both sides of the transaction, and it's both sides of the transaction that needs confidence. It's not just the farmer saying, hey, here's what we're going to do, and you have to, come on board, and it's not the banker saying, hey, you need to engage in this particular, activity. It's, a very adult conversation around what is valuable to the land today and the farming business today, and then what does that mean in terms of their ambitions around sustainability that are also aligned to whether it's the bank, the brand, the brokers, whoever it is in the supply chain, having really clear adult conversations around the journey, and not just saying, well, here's a green loan, it's out in the market, let's put a PR announcement out there and that's job done. It's much more than that, and it's much more nuanced, and farmers need to be the ones that have agency in that process. And there's things that they can do today around baselining of their asset, using good quality data for natural capital assessments without the clear understanding of ultimately what framework that might align to, but giving them the opportunity to lean into that when it does become more mature and more clear and the incentives are better. Michael.
And look, I might, because it segues into the next question, so I'll cut it off there. But it links in really nicely to Jackie's comment before about our emerging, maturity around understanding of prosperity as well as profitability. And that leads really nicely into the next trending question, and it was for you, Michael. Are banks offering significantly better terms or interest rates to producers who can prove they are operating on a more sustainable or net zero basis?
Oh, you really want me to say, oh, yes.
I know.
Yes.
Well, Anonymous wants you to say yes.
Yes. In a room full of academics,
This kind of question reminds me of that chart you did. I think it was in MBA marketing, and we may have an MBA marketing teacher here somewhere in the room. The 4 stages of product adoption. And at which of the stages are we with so much of this discussion? Somebody will correct me on this, please do it over lunch. The early adopters, when things trend up, when they plateau eventually. And the thing with this, sustainable finance is absolutely there. Green loans are absolutely there. But we as a banking system and an Australian agri-banking system are still in the early stages of this. Now, surprise, surprise, I said to the bank, this question is going to come up, you know, let's have and we continue to do this. How do you approach this? You will read marketing now and then, yes, Bank X has approved this biodigester at a giant dairy place, example of our sustainable finance, our green loans, or something else as well. But for all banks, they are continuing to look at how to work out this process properly, just in the same way that for so much of the technology here, continuing to refine, continuing to consolidate, continuing to work out where it's going. So the answer to your question, will we give you a substantial reduction on your interest rate? Your interest rate reduction is never substantial enough for you. Everybody always wants more. I'd like that with my home mortgage as well, but they won't do it for me. But yes, on a case-by-case basis, particularly on a larger scale, yes, these things will get very serious examination. And look at how they're doing. They probably won't be on a smaller scale. If you're doing sort of something small that adapts your place, that won't be seen through that lens. That'll be seen as sort of part of your normal operating procedure. But a fundamentally changing part of your operation could well be looked at. Could there be interest rate reductions there? There could be. Obviously, that's how sustainable finance works. Can't give you that definite answer because it's not there. And that answer, when we all sit down here next year as well, that will have evolved even more. So yes, it will get serious examination, but yes, very much it's still evolving.
Laura. Can I just take it back to a macro step? I am not the banker here. But here's an observation, folks. I am seeing banks getting into this space in a way they weren't doing it 3 years ago or 4 years ago or 5 years ago. I'm seeing venture capital funds being formed to fund innovation in this space that didn't even exist 3 years ago in Canada, and yet we're a big ag space like you. So what I am seeing at the macro level is trends towards money moving at all levels, whether it's debt servicing, whether it's equity servicing, into this space. And that, to me, is a good sign, because money never moves unless they think there's profit to be made.
And even to add to it, it's a great answer. We at ANZ, and I think the other banks have it, because I'm always open to them when the good offer comes, and then I'll be talking about another one. But they have set up venture capital arms. Ours is called 1835I, and I don't want to attract a rush of things, but when good ag tech has come in the past and said, what do you think of this? We have at times hand-passed it to our venture capital side and said, these are your guys to talk to, because they may be the people to work with you taking this kind of thing forward. The sustainable finance is on one side, but absolutely the VC side is there. And as Laura says, banks don't follow these things without seeing absolute long-term profitability potential. So there is that belief there and things are happening.
The macros are there, but if you talk to farmers on the ground, it's not flowing through in that kind of sustainable lending that you've talked about. And then you say at a big project, that's where the interest is in green loans. Can we not get to a point where farmers of every size, if they can articulate that it is a sustainable product or project, have access to a green line of finance? To then open up that opportunity to say, well, here's a measure of my transition towards sustainability is this number of projects with this amount of funding that is green, and there is rigour around the process that we've gone through on both sides to give confidence that that's a way to have that money land in the hands of farmers to do good projects, not just to be sustainable, but to drive profitability as well.
Yeah. personal experience with that earlier on this year. We purchased a new farm. We're one of those percentages that purchased the neighbour earlier on this year, for better or for worse, particularly with current pricing. But we tried to take a section of what we purchased to turn it into a project. We even had a carbon baselining project that was funded on our farm. And we're going to be revegetating, refencing, renovating the perennial pastures, had the project there for them for a certain, just a portion to be the green loan. And we weren't even looking for a interest rate decrease. We just wanted that section to be classed as their green loan. And they freaked out and didn't know what to do about it. So it's at the macro level. And when it was presented as a project for their green loan, and there was 2 banks that were advertising in their campaigns, they were giving green loans to farmers, including at a really big conference back in February on AgTech, and they didn't know what to do with it. So I'm hoping that's different now in October, but certainly at the beginning of the year they weren't ready for it. So that was our experience from a farm business.
Quick response, Michael.
Well, it's an interesting philosophical one. I'm glad we got this disagreement going. Spikes things up before lunch.
Yeah.
Do we also give me a call?
It wasn't ANZ.
Thank you.
So you're still in with a chance.
And that's why I said in the earlier one. Well, 2 points, and I'll be quick. One is that the marketing is there. That these things are happening, and I've seen big ones for biodigesters in dairy operations, but the thinking is still working itself out. It's not a quick thing, and banks are subject to a huge amount of regulations. Don't say the words Royal Commission, wakes us up in the middle of the night. So still working out how to evolve it. But I wanted to throw a philosophical one back to Stu's point as well. If we are looking at the whole discussion of green loans and sustainable finance right now, because it's not the norm. In 2033, here's a paper to be written, will there be green loans and sustainable finance, or will it be the norm by then? Do we have 10 years ahead of us where this becomes the differentiator, and then in 2033, we can't imagine it not being there?
Yeah, I think that absolutely you'll have to justify, where the money's being spent, and, sustainable finance will be at the core of every single ag business, every single agri bank. Absolutely, but the opportunity here and now and the noise is there's an opportunity, and then the farmers are saying how, and from Penny's example, it's just not connecting. The macro's talking in French and the on-ground's talking a completely different language, and they're not connecting. So if you can empower that by using good quality information, and again, whether it's a Chubb review around carbon or whether it's sustainable lending, it's integrity and transparency in that process. And that's where the technology can enable a farmer to say, hey, or enable a farmer that has a whole laundry list of projects that they wanted to engage in, and say, well, here is very discreetly the data sets and the direction and the action that will be taken, and here's the way that we'll continue to monitor that. There should be, from the bank, I would have thought, some motivations to say, well, if you can do that once, you can do it many times, this is the way to do it, and that starts to pave that and lubricate that transaction. And that's not just in sustainable lending, that's across the whole spectrum of the future of agriculture, is to enable those transactions to be more fluid, to unlock the transformation of the process across hundreds of thousands of projects, rather than just waiting for it to be sustainable one day.
I want to move now to some questions on value chain integration, and this one's addressed to you, Penny, but any of the panel can pick it up. How deep can value chain integration go? Might we see Coles or Woolworths covering the costs of, say, fertiliser based on sensor data and analytics?
Oh, I think that's a fair way off, but I do think there'll be a lot of stronger direct relationships between producers, their processors, which could be Coles, Woolworths, it could be Thomas Foods, it could be JBS, and then the next link in the chain as well, which is generally consumers or retail. And I think it could go back a step further too. So I said before about a transparent livestock marketplace. And I think that's a bigger issue. I'm actually feeling confident about where those bigger companies that buy our food and are worried about our scope 3s. Because of that scope 3 problem, for where the scope 3 is producers for them. They can put solar panels on their roofs and keep all their costs down and switch off the lights at night and reduce their emissions, but the food producers are their big problem for a scope 3. So I think they'll be forced into these really good connected relationships with their links in the chain to make sure that we're all going in the right direction. I think the digital solutions are before that, and that's with just buying and selling and trading livestock. So that's where I think the bigger change will need to happen.
Michael, you looking like you're wanting to make a comment?
No, Penny and I can disagree on something. They already are. Coles, for example, let's take the dairy industry. And in a nutshell, Australia has rapidly dwindling number of dairy farmers, and the supermarkets are trying to work out where to get their milk rather than having to import it. Coles is working with at least 100 dairy farmers to finance a lot of their new, whether, I keep using the word, whether it's biodigesters, whether it's helping to fund other sort of sustainability changes on their farms as well. There's a number of different parts to that. A, to tie up the relationship. B, to make them more relevant to some of the regulatory changes. And just because when you work with the value chain, I deal with a number of the Coles people and the supermarket people. They are actively looking at how they can work with, whether it's their fresh produce suppliers, whether it's their meat suppliers as well. They haven't got as far as they have with the dairy side, but to look at what they can do going forward.
Coles have done a really good job with beef and sheep producers, and they've sort of been the leading one in my eyes.
And there'll be a great discussion this afternoon around the Cool Soils Initiative and how that is integrating across the value chain to speak to that Scope 3 emissions. So make sure you come back for that.
I was just going to give one example where in the wool industry, we're experiencing brands actually connecting with landholders to finance and fund projects that are going to obviously improve the sustainability and the environmental condition of the asset, because there is this tangible thing that they can then market. So in different industries, there are different examples, but the Hugo Bosses of the world, Autovox, Country Roads, MJ Bale are saying, well, let's get away from a checkbox exercise and trying to invest in the whole market and actually start with putting fence lines in to protect riparian areas, to fence out areas that are going to be habitats for endangered birds like wedge-tailed eagles, and actually seeing that tangible result on farm to get through that kind of the opaqueness of the general sustainability kind of downward pressure as well.
Great. Laura, got a very open-ended question for you. What resources or platforms are available to help individual innovators with big ideas succeed?
Yeah, I actually think it depends on your geographic location and how important your industry is to that particular geography and so forth. But start basic is you got an idea, you understand the business, find someone that can help you. Now, whether that's through going to your local university or your local college and they can work with you from that, taking that idea to something, be a product or service, number one. And there's a way you can do that with sweat equity without necessarily needing a lot of money, typically. You need some proof of concept and viability. We actually run with Thrive and something called an academy, which allows anyone to go in and do that. And then through the academy, there's some training courses, but then they can also go get help anywhere else. Second, get non-dilutable equity or money as soon as you can. What do I mean by that? Simple, go get government grants or things that might be helping you get you from that now viable concept and prototype into something that's more repeatable. Third, repeat it, sell it to someone, find that customer. You can do that by going through an accelerator or incubator, or again, hooking up with other folks within your network. But you need someone to buy it to know that they really want the value you're trying to sell, even if the whole value isn't quite there yet and you're still refining things. Next stage, go up to your venture capital. You're going to give equity away, folks. Try not to give equity away until you get to that stage. And then you're going to give equity away because you want to scale that business now. It's not a sale of 1 or 2 or 3. It's a sale now beyond your local market, hopefully into your national or global market. And then further on, go to this guy next to me, or another banker I know, and and don't sell any more equity for a while. You got cash flows. You can make some, you can pay some interest rates, and then scale that business. You go through that stages. There's lots of money available. I have never seen as much money available in this sector ever in my lifetime, ever. I've never seen venture capital funds being formed solely for ag and sustainability and greenness, if I'm going to call it that, ever before. And even just in Alberta, by bringing in this Fill the Gap program I mentioned earlier on to try and grow and scale some businesses, within 12 months, four funds, venture funds are being formed, 2 of which are solely in ag, because now the free market sees opportunities that they never thought were available in this sector. So I hope I've given you some, keep as much of the company as you can when you start, validate what you've got, sell a piece of the equity to get what you need to scale, and then past that, go to these guys. And then ultimately, don't sell to someone else. Buy someone else instead, because you'll have enough money to do so.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Lots of great questions still coming through. Keep them coming. We'll try and address them during the day. But Lammy, I'll hand back to you to close this session. Please join with me in thanking the panelists.